You planned it, you prepared, you gave her your best. And the guy who barely looked her way, who offered nothing but indifference, walked out with everything. You've seen it. You've lived it. Maybe you've even been the good guy, patient, consistent, available, and watched her walk straight into the arms of someone who treated her like an option. That's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. What David Buss uncovered about primal attraction and female psychology reveals something most men are never supposed to know. There's a force older than culture, older than language, buried deep inside the subconscious desire of every woman. And today, we're pulling it into the light. If what you just heard already shifted something in you, go ahead and subscribe. What gets uncovered on this channel runs deeper than most men are ever willing to go. The brutal reason behind women's attraction to cruel men. David Buss. There's a question that haunts a lot of men quietly in the back of their minds. Why does she choose him? Not the stable one. Not the one who shows up. Not the one who's consistent, who listens, who puts in the work. She chooses the one who keeps her guessing. The one who operates like the rules don't apply to him. And the brutally honest answer to that question isn't found in dating advice. It's found in evolutionary psychology, in the deepest layers of the female brain, where logic has never lived. David Buss didn't set out to make men uncomfortable. He set out to find the truth. A professor at the University of Texas at Austin, Buss spent decades studying sexual selection across cultures, interviewing over 10,000 people in 37 societies. What he found wasn't what the world wanted to hear. Primal attraction, he discovered, doesn't follow the rules of modern romance. It follows something far older. Something encoded in the female subconscious long before civilization decided what good was supposed to look like. Here's what most men get wrong from the very beginning. They believe attraction is a reward system, that if they do enough right things, they'll earn desire. Be kind, be present, be reliable, be generous. Stack the good behaviors high enough and eventually she'll feel it. But that's not how primal instincts work. Attraction isn't a transaction. It was never designed to be fair. It was designed, over millions of years of evolution, to identify something specific, and kindness alone was never on that list. What was on that list? Dominance. Not cruelty for its own sake, but the behavioral patterns that signal dominance, the stillness, the indifference. The quiet certainty of a man who doesn't need approval to feel complete. Female psychology, at its evolutionary core, was wired to detect these signals instantly, not because women consciously choose them, but because the subconscious desire to find a strong protector, a man of high status, runs deeper than any conscious preference ever could. This is the uncomfortable science that most people would rather pretend doesn't exist. Think about this for a moment. For hundreds of thousands of years, survival didn't go to the kindest man. It went to the most capable one. The man who could defend, lead, provide, and dominate his environment. Women's brains evolved during that entire period, selecting, filtering, responding to signals of strength. So when a man today walks into a room with raw masculinity, with a presence that doesn't ask for permission, something ancient activates. Not a thought. Not a decision. A feeling. Deep, involuntary, and almost impossible to explain. That's what David Buss called the dark side of human desire. In his landmark work, The Evolution of Desire, Buss laid out with clinical precision how male dominance and emotional unavailability, traits modern society labels as toxic, are precisely the traits that trigger the oldest, most powerful attraction mechanisms in female psychology. Not because women want to suffer, but because, evolutionarily speaking, a man who doesn't chase, who doesn't collapse under social pressure, who holds his frame regardless of how she reacts, looks to the primal brain like a survivor. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Buss and his research team ran studies tracking what women found attractive across completely different cultures, from urban America to remote tribal communities. The results were consistent. Women, regardless of their background, education, or stated preferences, were drawn to signals of psychological power and social dominance. The nice guy wasn't losing because he was nice. He was losing because he was broadcasting something else entirely: neediness, overinvestment, and a quiet desperation that the female subconscious reads as low value every single time. So let's talk about what that actually looks like in real life. Picture a man, someone who genuinely cared, who gave everything he had in a relationship. He was attentive, communicative, always there when she needed him. And the more he gave, the more distant she became. He thought he was doing it right. He thought consistency would build attraction. What he didn't understand was that his behavior, however well-intentioned, was sending a very specific signal. I need your approval to feel okay. And that signal, that quiet emotional dependency, is one of the most powerful attraction killers in the entire psychological landscape of primal attraction. This isn't about becoming cold. It isn't about pretending you don't feel things. That's a misreading of the science, and a dangerous one. What the research actually points to is something far more nuanced: self-mastery. The ability to feel deeply and still remain grounded, to care without collapsing, to be present without being consumed. A man who has built that kind of internal architecture doesn't need to perform cruelty to trigger attraction. His masculine presence alone does the work, because it signals the one thing the female brain has always been searching for: a man who is in control of himself. There's a study worth knowing here. In 2009, researchers at the University of New Mexico examined how women's preferences shifted across their hormonal cycles. What they found aligned directly with Buss's evolutionary framework. During peak fertility, women showed a measurable increase in attraction toward men displaying dominance hierarchy markers: assertiveness, social confidence, and emotional unavailability. Not in a conscious, deliberate way, but biologically, hormonally, as if the body already knew what the mind wasn't ready to admit. The primal instincts don't wait for permission. One man understood this the hard way. He spent 3 years in a relationship where he gave everything: time, energy, emotional labor, and received distance in return. He read the books. He had the conversations. He tried to be everything she said she wanted. Nothing shifted. It wasn't until he stepped back, stopped performing, and started focusing on his own psychological power and personal growth that something changed, not just in how she responded to him, but in how every person around him responded. He didn't become cruel. He became grounded. And that changed everything. What that man discovered, without knowing the academic language for it, was the core truth behind attraction science. Desire is not generated by effort. It's generated by presence. The man who walks into a room already complete, who isn't looking for validation, who isn't adjusting himself to fit what he thinks she wants, activates something in female psychology that no amount of effort, planning, or emotional availability can manufacture. Presence isn't performed. It's built, internally, over time, through the kind of internal transformation most men never commit to. Let's break down what those behavioral patterns actually look like, the ones that register as dominance without tipping into genuine cruelty. First, emotional non-reactivity. A man who doesn't spike emotionally when challenged, who doesn't rush to defend himself, who responds rather than reacts, broadcasts psychological strength at a level most people feel before they understand. This isn't suppression. It's regulation. It's the difference between a man running from his emotions and a man who has made peace with them. That kind of stillness is rare, and rare things by definition are high value. Second, mission over validation. The man who is deeply invested in something beyond the relationship, a purpose, a craft, a direction, carries a gravitational pull that the man without one simply doesn't have. Evolutionary drive wasn't designed to point toward comfort. It was designed to point toward expansion. A man who is building something, who is moving towards something, who doesn't need the relationship to define him, triggers something primal in female psychology, not because he's ignoring her, but because he's someone worth following. That's a distinction most men never learn to make. Third, tolerating discomfort without dissolving. This is perhaps the most underrated signal in all of attraction science. A man who can sit in silence without filling it, who can handle tension without rushing to resolve it, who can be challenged without shrinking. That capacity to remain intact under pressure is one of the oldest signals of masculine identity that the female brain is wired to detect. It doesn't look like aggression. It doesn't look like dominance in the loud, performative sense. It looks like a man who has already decided who he is, and that decision is unshakable. Now here's the part that most content on this subject conveniently skips. The men who understand these psychological triggers and use them manipulatively, they get results short-term, but they build nothing. They attract, and then they destroy, because dark psychology without a foundation of genuine character is just a more sophisticated form of emptiness. The real shift, the one that changes a man's life permanently, isn't learning how to trigger attraction. It's becoming the kind of man whose natural state already does it. That's not a technique. That's a transformation. And transformation requires honesty. Specifically, the kind of honesty most men avoid because it's uncomfortable. The question isn't why does she choose him over me? The real question is, what am I actually broadcasting? Because every interaction, every posture, every response under pressure, it's all signal. The female subconscious is reading it constantly, without effort, without conscious thought. And what it's looking for isn't perfection. It's not resources. It's not even physical appearance at its core. It's the behavioral signature of a man who is not afraid of himself. Think about what that means practically. If you're over-explaining yourself in conversations, that's a signal. If you're adjusting your opinion the moment she pushes back, that's a signal. If you're always the first to break the silence, always the one to reinitiate, always the one managing her emotional state at the expense of your own, that's a signal. None of these behaviors are morally wrong, but they are communicating something to the primal brain that no amount of good intention can override. They say, I need this to work, and need at the subconscious level is the opposite of alpha behavior. So what does the man who has done the work actually look like? He's not the loudest in the room. He's often the quietest. He doesn't chase, not because he's playing games, but because he genuinely doesn't need to. He's curious, not desperate. He's warm, but not available to everyone. He has standards that he enforces without anger, without explanation. He takes up space, not physically, but psychologically. When he speaks, people lean in. When he leaves, the energy in the room shifts. That's not charisma. That's masculine presence built from the inside out. If you want to start developing that kind of presence, the work begins internally. Not with pickup lines. Not with behavioral tricks. With genuine self-mastery. Start with your relationship to discomfort. Specifically, your impulse to relieve social tension the moment it appears. Practice holding it. Let silence do its work. Read the foundational texts. Buss's own The Evolution of Desire is essential. Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature goes deep into psychological power and behavioral patterns. And for the internal work, journals, strength training, cold exposure, anything that builds tolerance for discomfort and trains the nervous system to stay grounded under pressure. Here's the brutal truth that ties all of this together. Women aren't attracted to cruel men because they want cruelty. They're drawn to the signal that cruelty sometimes mimics, which is the signal of a man who is not controlled by his need for approval. A man who doesn't collapse. A man who doesn't beg, perform, or shrink. When a woman falls for someone who treats her badly, she's not choosing pain. She's responding to the one thing her evolutionary wiring was built to respond to, a man who appears to need nothing from her. The tragedy is that most of those men are empty, but the signal is real, and it can be built without the emptiness. The deepest layer of all of this, the one that David Buss's research points toward without always saying it directly, is that attraction is a mirror. What it reflects isn't what a man does. It reflects what a man is. Not his achievements, not his appearance, his psychological architecture. The way he carries himself when nothing is going his way. The way he responds when he's tested. The way he holds his identity when everything around him is pulling at it. That's what subconscious desire responds to. That's what primal attraction has always been calibrated to find. And it's the one thing no technique can fake for long. This is why internal transformation isn't optional, it's the entire game. The man who understands evolutionary psychology at an intellectual level but hasn't done the internal work is like someone who reads every book about swimming and then drowns. Knowledge without embodiment is just entertainment. The shift happens when a man stops studying attraction from the outside and starts building himself from the inside. When his masculine identity becomes something he lives, not something he performs for an audience of one. Here's something worth sitting with. Every man who has ever triggered deep, lasting attraction, not the shallow kind, not the kind built on games and manipulation, but the kind that makes a woman stay, grow, and choose, was a man who had, at some level, resolved his relationship with himself. He wasn't seeking. He wasn't performing. He was simply present, purposeful, and complete. That's not a personality type. That's not something you're born with. That's something you build. Deliberately. Painfully. Through the kind of emotional strength that most men spend their entire lives avoiding. And what's waiting on the other side of that work isn't just better relationships. It's a completely different experience of being alive. The man who has done this work doesn't just attract differently, he moves through the world differently. His decisions come from a different place. His boundaries hold without effort. His relationships reflect his value back at him. The dominance hierarchy he occupies isn't given to him by others, it's built from within, and no one can take it. That's what the science has always been pointing toward. Not how to get her, but how to become the man that doesn't have to figure that out. What David Buss gave the world wasn't a manual for manipulation. It was a mirror, a brutally honest reflection of what human desire actually responds to, stripped of romanticization, cultural conditioning, and wishful thinking. And what that mirror shows, when a man is brave enough to look directly into it, is that the path forward was never about understanding her. It was always about understanding himself. The psychology of attraction, at its deepest level, is the psychology of self, and that is where everything changes. So here's the real question, and take a moment with this one. Not why does she choose him, but who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when there's no one to impress, no outcome to chase, no approval to earn? Because that man, the one you are in private, is exactly the man the world experiences in public. Attraction doesn't lie. People don't lie, not at the subconscious level. And the primal forces that David Buss spent a lifetime mapping out don't respond to who you're trying to be. They respond to who you've actually become. You now understand something that most men will never sit down long enough to learn. You understand that primal attraction isn't random. That emotional unavailability isn't a flaw in female psychology. It's a signal detection system built over hundreds of thousands of years. That raw masculinity isn't about aggression or cruelty. It's about a man who has done the internal work to become unshakable. That self-mastery isn't a personality trait. It's a practice. A daily, deliberate, sometimes brutal practice of becoming the man your own life has been waiting for. Here's what I want you to do right now. Drop a comment below. Just write, "I'm building." That's it. 2 words. Because that's the commitment, not to be perfect, not to have it all figured out, but to be in motion. To be the man who chose to understand rather than ignore. To be the man who looked in the mirror and decided the reflection was going to change. And if this video reached something real in you, something that had been sitting quietly in the back of your mind for a long time, then you already know this channel is different. There's no noise here, no performance, just the kind of depth that serious men come back to. Thank you. Genuinely. Watching until the end isn't something everyone does, and the fact that you did says everything about the kind of man you're becoming. This work matters. You matter. You were never meant to be the man waiting to be chosen. You were built to be the man worth choosing.